Hello, this is Brian M. Wargo, and I'm from the Pittsburgh Igloo Society, talking to you today about building igloo domes. This is a project I'm working on, so first things first, let's take you outside and give you an update. All right, it's mid-August, and it's still about 75 degrees out, and it's in the morning, and it's probably 99% humidity. Um, But this is a positive sign. We're having a cool front come through, and those 90-degree days are kind of going behind us, which means igloo season is only about 4.5 months into the future. All we have to do is drop about another 50 degrees and get a little precipitation, and we have igloo season. So this is the time that you want to figure out what you're doing with your igloos. A lot of people think you just wait for snow, pile it up, dig a hole. That's not an igloo, right? Igloos are engineered structures. They're either block or they're formed, and they are made in a way that maximizes their strength. So figuring out how to make an igloo is really important to think through, um, especially if you're building big igloos. A small igloo, you can kind of do that one on the fly, but really big igloos require quite a bit of planning. And so that's what I spent July doing, is a little R&D. I'm trying to figure out how to make a gigantic igloo, and often I end up alone on these igloo projects. So I'm trying to figure out how I can possibly get this gigantic igloo to get formed if I have to do it on my own. And so this series of videos is about a different system that I've come up with. One of the biggest problems is reaching to the top to get the snow up there. So I'm working on that problem. I'm also working on the very top. It's hard to literally reach to make blocks. If you know you're 5 foot tall and you're standing on a small stool, maybe like you're 6 foot. I'm sorry, 6 or 7 foot. Maybe you reach, but trying to get snow up there is really a problem. So I've come up with a new scheme, a new way of thinking about making a frame, and if this works, it could potentially help lots of people make igloos. And so that's what I'm going to be doing over the next series of videos. But most of these were done actually during July, most of the R&D. So that's what I'm going to be showcasing now. So, all right. But again, if you haven't considered making an igloo, start thinking about like what materials you have, how you're going to do it, where you're going to do it. The earlier you start letting this stew in your brain, by the time full igloo season is here, hopefully you'll at least be in a better position. So, all right, well, good luck. So the problem with building igloos is A, they're difficult. And if you're working alone, then they're more difficult. And if you're building big igloos, they're even more difficult. So here's one of the solutions that I'm working on, designing a scaffolding. So if I have a way to hold up the dome until it forms, then lower it down, the idea is you might be able to build a big igloo on your own. That's what we're going to investigate. So I've done a bunch of brainstorming here, and if you don't know, the mathematics behind igloos can be a little bit daunting. You can use cosh functions and so on, and there's a bunch of different ways to get a catenary or catenary, however you want to pronounce it. How do you get the snow to the top of the igloo? Remember igloos here, here's one of my little drawings, they're roundish up top, and you got to like stand here and try and get snow up here and pack it. So I'm thinking about making a specialized ladder, as you can see in this little diagram that I just sketched when I was down in the shop. And if you're building block igloos, you have to somehow get the snow up here and then form it. And often the only way to do it is to stand on like a a chair or something in here, have snow inside your igloo, and then create blocks. But what I'm trying to do is, can I build a scaffolding all the way around this and put the snow on top and form the igloo dome from the outside? My daughter's pretty awesome at crafting, so she took this piece of paper that I had on the last slide and showed me if you cut a slit in a circle and pull it together, you can make a cone. The problem with a cone is this is a straight line down here like this. It's linear. A cone and a catenary are very different. So actually you don't want straight lines on your igloo. You don't really have a lot of strength. But if I show you what my 11'8" design was, I just cranked these through on Excel, and this is one that I had planned and executed. But of course, they are going to shrink over time. So in the end, once it's formed, it probably went down to 6 foot here, probably dropped 2 feet in just a matter of 48 hours or something like that. But anyhow, you could see at the top here, it almost looks like a circular type of curve. Here it looks parabolic. And then down here, if you were to, use the idea of calculus and you take the slope of each one of these little lines, it almost looks linear on the sides here. Okay. And that's what a catenary curve gives this weird, it's almost like linear parabola circle combination. And so I'm going to use that to my advantage. And snow is pliable, and you can shape it how you want. But remember, it doesn't have that much strength. So I do like to do my calculations here theoretically and then modify as I need. I did try to use an integration idea where I was building these out of paper at first, seeing could I end up getting the curve that I wanted. It turns out I couldn't. Even paper has a lot of strength, and this ended up being like a stair-step pattern, but it was still in a slope of like a y equals mx plus b. So it just wasn't working out. So I had to figure something out. And so here's my final thought. I ended up forming a metal structure. Couple things here. Here's my I-beam in my garage, my shop. I have a metal bender, and I don't know if you can see, but look at one of these metal bands coming down. I bent it in such a way that it looks kind of linear down here, kind of parabolic here, and then circular up top. And this isn't how it normally looks when I was first bent. I had to end up making this giant metal ring, which was difficult in itself, and it's got a really nice radius. I think it was a 21 foot straight piece of square tube. You can see that on the garage floor, I often use that as a template. I don't have a table that's large enough to do these things, but here I can clamp things together just using little spring-loaded clamps just to give me an idea of the structure. Of course, I'm not going to leave it up there, so I need to bring in some kind of support structure. So I welded that, and you can see here's my support structure, and then I have it down on this table, and you could see that I have my metal ring down near my template on the ground here. And you could also see these little tiny tabs. I welded these tabs on so that I would be able to connect the two without using spring-loaded clamps. This is going to be out of order a little bit, but I took this outside, and this is, I think, before I had this main support. I ended up putting on a base that's a little bit stronger. I put legs on it. I'll show you that in a second. And of course, I'm going to need to somehow support it from the side so it doesn't wobble. And you could see the curvature, and this is what I'm thinking about the dome. This is going to be outside. This is like a test run. So it's going to be, that's about where the dome is going to be on the outside. There's my tunnel back there, and that's pretty tall. I'm eventually going to make another video outside and I'll show you how to construct this. Here's reinforcing that base. First, I just had all of the pressure coming straight down onto a 2x4 underneath this fiberboard. Then I welded on legs, and then I welded on feet, and then I extended the feet. So adding stability was the key. And distributing the load. Underneath each one of these is a 2x4 running perpendicular to one another, and where they meet, most of the force is going down there. But the feet certainly give me a little bit of counter torque when the wind is blowing. Now I need to figure out some way to put a skin over this frame, this skeleton, if you will. And I didn't have big enough pieces of cardboard, so I made some and I reinforced it with central pieces. And I made really large pieces of cardboard, which is surprisingly strong. Problem is, it doesn't like to bend. And then I really got into the problem, brought this back inside. There's my boy, he's working on some project of his own. And I start cutting chunks of this to see if I could get it to bend. And it is much more difficult than you would think. It's a smooth board that I got from, I think, Home Depot. It's fiberglass based, and cutting it is absolutely a mess. So that was tricky. Here's the underview. It doesn't look terrible, and it has plenty of strength at this point. But when you look at the top view, I guess I should mention one other thing. Right now, I'm just holding this up by clamps. This has a very little strength, so I'm going to need to figure out a way to attach that laminate to the frame. And I did that by welding on some of these washers that I could then stick bolts through. And you'll see that in this next caption. So now I have the bolts, and I have them in the wrong direction at this point because snow is going to be up on here, and I can't have these bolts sticking out. So I'm going to have to flip them around, but it's a pretty terrible fit. And I really worked hard trying to get this to fit, and I tried to use some mathematics for it. No chance there. It is just a very difficult process, and it doesn't like to bend, and you can see it curls up on itself. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get this together, and so now I'm reshaping it, putting it in different ways, and eventually taking it off, putting it back on many times, doing many cuts. I was eventually able to wrestle it into this configuration and cut off the sides so it's fitting pretty well. Each one of these panels, I have 6 of them now, they each fit onto their section. This isn't fully done here, but it's getting close. And here's going to be the base that is going to go outside. And here's an underneath view. Once I fully had it done, you could see it actually fits pretty nicely. I tried to minimize scrap, so I ended up making using 3 pieces of scrap to make one of the panels here. I think you can see that. You can see how they're attached here. You could see the side supports going down to this wooden base, up to the frame, to this big round, well, if it's 21 foot and divide that by pi, right? So it's going to be, what is it, 7 or 8 feet across there. And you could see the 2x4s down here, and there's another one through the center. And so let me show you how I'm going to be taking this apart, because in the end, I'm going to build this inside the igloo at first, and then I have to take it apart. So I was thinking, can I take this apart from the inside? That's what I'm going to show you in this next quick video. Well, it's not a quick video, but it'll be sped up. Here I am in fast motion, taking all the screws off. Actually, they're bolts, and they're all exactly the same. That allows me to put this back together, take it apart. I always have exactly the same screw. You can also notice there's a white powder all over the garage floor, and where I'm standing, pretty much over everything. That was cutting this fiber board, this fiberglass board. It really made a tremendous mess. And if I had to do it again, I would find an alternate method of cutting it. And keep in mind that this will be done inside an igloo, but you won't be able to see that, so that's why I'm doing it here. I'm marking these pieces so I can put it back together readily. This big beautiful ring that I made, I had to chop up, and it stayed fairly round, but you'll see that it when I put the welds on it, it definitely distorted it a little bit. So it's not perfect at this point, but it's what needed to be done because there's no other way to get that ring out of the igloo door. And while this is faster than I normally work, some people claim that I have ADHD or ADD, and that might be true, but you just use it to your advantage and get a lot of things done. Now that that ring is off, these kind of spring back, these fingers kind of spring back out. You can see there's a hexagon up top there, and it's going to really be the centerpiece of all of these fingers hanging down, kind of like an umbrella. And that was really difficult to get to align how I needed to and to fit on that T structure up top. I'll probably leave all the bolts loaded right in it, and then I can just put it back up. As long as I have it marked and I know which way it aligns, it should go pretty quickly. It looks like that's before I put the extra legs on. Okay, well that's my video. All right, so again, now you can see how you go from having this structure to taking it apart. But here's what the big problem is going to be. If I have snow that is being supported by this apparatus, and let's say there's hundreds of pounds of snow up there, how am I going to take this apart when snow is pushing down on it? So I'm going to need to lower this system. And let me put my pointer back on here. That's what I'm going to end up having to do now. Now that I've got the basic structure, how I like it, I like the curvature of it, I can take it apart, but I'm going to have to take this apart while I'm inside the igloo. In order to do any of this, I'm going to have to lower this down. And so that's what I'm about to do. I'm about to cut all of these supports and put a lowering device. Here's what I came up with. I'm going to take my all thread, and I'm going to, instead of just using a single nut, I'm going to end up making essentially a longer nut. And this is to minimize the play. If you've ever used a bolt and a nut, there's a lot of play in it. But if here, let me go to the next slide and I'll kind of show you what I mean by this. If I end up extending this distance between the last thread of this bolt and this bolt, I get less and less play. In other words, think of the bolt going straight out here. This amount of play will be minimized the further distance I go out here. And the longer the rod is itself that fits up inside this other piece, the less play it's going to have. And so if you look, this is how I'll untwist. This is how I'll lower. I attached this piece down to this other piece of pipe here, and it has really minimized the play. I had to also make this system for each of these. Here's the central lowering rod. This is one of the side lowering rods, as you can see in the background right here. All of these have to be lowered together, and they're going to be lowered about 5 inches, 6 inches. And that should give me plenty of space to end up deconstructing the igloo. That's probably enough for this video, but I do want to show you that I did make a ladder, and I'll incorporate that into the next video. So yeah, like I said, igloo season's going to be here before we know it, so start planning. And until next time, have a good day.